All right, ready to dive in. You sent over some excerpts from Byung-Chul Han's In the Swarm, Visions of the Digital. Looks like some pretty heavy stuff. How technology's changing us, you know? Privacy, even how we act in the world.
Yeah, definitely thought-provoking.
Mm.
Han's perspective, it's really relevant right now with how much time we all spend online.
It is. One of the first things that jumped out at me, Han's idea of this, the digital swarm, he says it's different from like a physical crowd, you know? Like at a concert or a protest. Online, even on the same platform, there's not that same unity. It's more like everyone's just kind of shouting into the void.
Hmm.
What do you think? Does that line up with how you experience being online?
Hmm. It is an interesting distinction. I think, yeah, he's got a point about that shared purpose or lack of it in online groups.
Hmm.
Think about online political discussions, for example. Lots of heat, but does it translate to any real change in the world?
Good point. And then that connects to, well, Han's argument that all this online communication is eroding our privacy. He even goes as far as saying there's basically no such thing as a truly private moment anymore thanks to smartphones and all that. Kind of scary, huh?
Yeah, makes you think. He uses this word rispetto. It's Italian. Basically, this respectful distance between people. We used to have boundaries, public versus private life. But online, it's all blurred.
Yeah, that Italian word rispetto stuck with me. He explains how it's a concept more common in cultures where personal space, those boundaries, are really valued. It's like a built-in understanding that everyone needs breathing room, a zone of privacy.
Yeah, and I think it's a loss we don't even fully realize is happening. We're just
Yeah.
so used to putting everything out there online, like breakfast, deepest thoughts, everything.
He doesn't stop there. Han then says this lack of privacy is creating a digital panopticon. Like we're always being watched, even if we can't see who's doing the watching.
It's from that old prison design,
Yeah.
18th century. The guard could theoretically see every prisoner at any time. But online, it's less about a single guard. It's more about the potential for constant surveillance from various sources.
Yeah.
Makes you super self-conscious online. It's not even just like governments or corporations, right?
Mhm.
It's how we watch and judge each other online. Han talks about the rise of, what does he call it? The shitstorm, that wave of outrage online,
Mhm.
criticism.
Oh, for sure. Those can be brutal. Yeah. We've all seen them. Twitter comment sections, people just waiting to unleash.
And he links that back to, the panopticon, that loss of rispetto.
Yeah.
We're so visible online, no distance, makes us vulnerable to these kinds of attacks.
So, like, the internet's amplified our capacity for outrage, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And it creates this, like, climate of fear, right? You're afraid to speak your mind, say anything unpopular, you might get attacked.
Yeah.
He calls it the society of indignation. Outrage and anger, that's how we express ourselves now.
So, wait, this hyperconnectivity, the thing that was supposed to bring us together, it's actually pushing us apart.
Right. And that actually, it leads into another point Han makes, this shift from action to play in the digital age.
Yeah.
Technology, it's replaced real action with these more passive ways of engaging. Scrolling, games, just consuming content.
Yeah, we can lose hours just clicking and liking things, but is that really action? I mean, like actually doing something.
Exactly. He's questioning that. He says this constant digital engagement, it can make us less likely to take action in the real world. We're so caught up in the internet game, we forget about what's outside our screens.
He uses the like button as a great example. It seems so small, but he sees it as like a symbol of this. We like a post about climate change, and it makes us feel like we did something. But did we?
Right. It's like expressing support without doing anything real, tangible.
Right.
And he's worried this is becoming the norm, this passive engagement.
So what does that mean for like politics, social change? If we're all in the digital game, do we lose our ability to act in the real world?
Big question Han wrestles with. He's especially critical of, this idea of digital democracy. Technology is a tool for more participation, but
But he's saying the engagement online, the likes and polls, it's surface level, doesn't make us think deeply or talk to each other in a meaningful way.
and remember how we were talking about citizen versus consumer? He sees that in politics too. We're not informed citizens engaging with issues. We're just consumers of political content, picking what fits our beliefs.
Like we're shopping for opinions instead of, I don't know, actually thinking and debating.
Exactly. And it leads to this fragmented political landscape, right? Polarized,
Yeah.
people talking past each other, not really having conversations.
So if he's right, that we're more consumer than citizen now, what does that mean for democracy?
Well, he sees it as a huge challenge. We have to resist this trend, this passive consumption, be more critical of what we see online, talk to each other, debate the things that matter.
That's a lot to ask, though, right? I mean, it's so easy to get sucked into that endless stream of information entertainment.
For sure. But his work reminds us we do have a choice in how we engage. We can be passive consumers, or we can be active citizens.
So if we want to be more active, more engaged, where do we even start? What can we actually do?
Good question. One thing he says, be mindful of your time online. Are you connecting with people in a real way, or just mindlessly consuming?
Makes sense. It's easy to get lost in that scroll, but maybe ask yourself, is this how I want to spend my time and energy?
And then be more critical of the information you see. Not everything online is true.
Right.
You got to develop those critical thinking skills, separate fact from fiction, truth from, propaganda and all that.
So it's not JST about how we use tech, but how we think about the info we get through tech.
Exactly. This ties into his critique of what he calls the society of information. We're bombarded with so much, it's hard to know what to believe.
It's like we're drowning in information, but we're thirsty for knowledge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and he's worried that leads to less critical thinking, less debate. It's easier to just accept what you see without questioning it.
So the digital age is empowering and disempowering at the same time. More info than ever, but harder to find the truth.
That's a good way to put it. That tension is at the heart of his work. See the potential problems, but also believe we can use it to make a better world.
So not about rejecting tech, but using it in a way that helps us individually and collectively.
Right. Being more conscious, more deliberate about our choices online.
And maybe spending a bit less time online, more time connecting in person. Like Han reminds us, the digital world, it's just one part of being human.
Couldn't agree more. Finding that balance, the digital A&D, the real world, in a healthy way.
Speaking of the real world, Han makes these interesting comparisons, digital communication versus face-to-face.
Yeah, he points out that digital lacks those nonverbal cues, the stuff that's important for understanding, empathy. Online, we miss the facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. Hard to know what someone really means.
It's like you're only getting part of the message, like reading a transcript of a conversation, but not hearing the voices.
Exactly. And that leads to, misunderstandings. Especially with tough topics, sensitive stuff.
It's like the internet stripped away the nuance of how we talk.
Right.
Made it simpler, but also more adversarial.
And that affects relationships, personal, professional.
Right.
Harder to build trust, rapport, that closeness if it's mostly online.
So tech helps us stay in touch with people far away, but it makes it harder to connect with the people right in front of us.
Yeah, and that ties back to, remember, the digital swarm. Lots of online connection, but it can lead to feeling isolated, alienated.
Like surrounded by people online, but still lonely.
Right, and that loneliness, that affects mental health, well-being.
So what's the antidote? How do we feel connected like we belong in this tech-driven world?
Han would say, recognize the limits of digital communication.
Yeah.
Make an effort to connect in more meaningful ways.
Like put the phone down more, have actual conversations, do things that build community.
Exactly. And be more intentional with how you use tech. Can social media build stronger relationships, not just be about consuming content?
Good points. It's a reminder that tech is a tool, right? And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's our choice.
And it's always changing. A problem today might be solved by something new tomorrow.
So the future of tech, it's still being written. And we all have a hand in writing it.
Absolutely. And that's something hopeful, I think, from Han's work. He's critical, but he also believes we can use tech to make things better.
Now, to switch gears a bit, Han also talks about how the digital world changes our relationship with time and space.
He says the internet creates this timeless time. Everything's available all at once. Movies from the 50s, music from the 80s, yesterday's news, it's all right there.
It's like past, present, future all smashed together. Overwhelming, but kind of freeing too, in a way.
Right. And that timelessness, it applies to space too. Internet connects us across the world, no matter how far apart we are.
World's gotten smaller. Everyone's just a click away.
But he says this shrinking of time and space, it has downsides too. Well, it can make you feel placeless. Always connected digitally. You lose touch with your surroundings, your sense of place.
Makes you think about people glued to their phones, missing the sunset, the people around them.
Exactly. And that loss of place, it leads to a loss of community too. Always interacting online, do you lose connection with the people nearby?
Like the internet's a virtual world, and it can feel more real, more engaging than what's around us.
And that affects belonging, identity. If you're not connected to a place or community, who are you?
Deep stuff. Not sure there are easy answers.
Nope. But Han's work makes us ask these questions. Think critically about how tech shapes us and our world.
So in this increasingly digital world, how do we hold on to a sense of place, community, self?
It starts with, being mindful of how we use tech. Choose to use it in ways that connect us to the physical world, to our communities, to ourselves.
Like using tech to learn about our local area, connect with neighbors, appreciate what's beautiful around us.
Exactly. And using it for self-awareness, growth.
Hmm.
Learn, connect with people with shared interests, express yourself creatively.
It's not about demonizing tech, but using it for things that matter to us.
Right, taking control, using tech to build the world we want.
And maybe that's the key takeaway from Han. We have a choice. How we engage with tech shapes the future.
Now, speaking of choices, he also has interesting things to say about technology and freedom.
He says the internet, even though it's supposed to be about freedom and democracy, can also be used to, like, restrict our freedoms and control how we act.
He points to, the rise of the digital panopticon. Our online activities, they're constantly being tracked, monitored. Governments, corporations, even each other.
We talked about that before, but it's a big deal in his work, right? This feeling of being watched, even if you don't know who's watching, makes you think twice about speaking freely.
Exactly. And that's where respeto comes in again, that respectful distance. In a world where everything you do is tracked, it's harder to feel private, autonomous.
It's like we're in this giant digital fishbowl. Everything's on display.
Yeah, and it can make you censor yourself. You second guess what you say, what you do, because it might be controversial, unacceptable.
Like we're all walking on eggshells, afraid to say anything that might get us in trouble or attacked online.
And that affects open, honest conversation, the kind you need for a healthy democracy.
So the internet opens up new ways to communicate, express ourselves, but it also creates new challenges for free speech, free thought.
One of the big paradoxes of the digital age, right?
Mm.
The same tools that can promote freedom can also restrict it.
It's a tough balance. We need to be really aware of it as we navigate this new digital world.
Absolutely. And this goes back to, what Han emphasizes. Critical thinking, mindful engagement with technology, see the pitfalls, but also see the potential for creating a better society.
It's a challenge, but an opportunity too. And that's the hopeful part of his work. Feels like Han's pushing us to, be active in shaping this digital world, not just letting it shape us.
Yeah, for sure. He brings up this older thinker, Gustave Le Bon, studied crowd psychology, like way back in the 19th century. Le Bon said crowds were easily swayed, and Han sees a connection to the digital swarm today.
But there's a difference, right? Crowds all in one place, swarms spread out online.
Exactly, that's the thing. He thinks that makes the digital swarm even more susceptible. Like a crowd with no grounding, so it's pulled around by, I don't know, fake news, those targeted ads, all that.
Makes you wonder about those viral trends. Do they just appear out of nowhere? Or is there something else going on manipulating things behind the scenes?
Han would probably say, yeah, there's more to it. He even says, unlike those old crowds Le Bon studied, the digital swarm, it lacks a soul, a shared spirit.
So it's not about the common good anymore, more about what individual desires, like online narcissism, always wanting attention, validation.
You're picking up on it. And that leads to another big idea he has, how all this digital stuff affects our sense of self. Digital exhibitionism, he calls it. People feel like they got to share everything online.
It is like we're all in this reality show, huh? Curating the perfect image. But does that even reflect who we really are?
That's what he's asking. Are we losing ourselves trying to create this perfect online persona? Do we care more about how we look than who we are?
It's exhausting, so much pressure to be this idealized version. No wonder everyone feels anxious, burned out. What do we do about it, though?
He doesn't have, the simple answer. But his work makes us aware. Maybe it's spending less time looking for that online validation, more time connecting with, ourselves, with others in a genuine way.
Stepping away from the digital noise to find out what really matters makes sense.
And maybe question this whole idea of a purely digital self.
Yeah.
We're more than just profiles, right? We have bodies, relationships, we exist in the world.
So finding a way to balance those two things, the digital and the real, in a healthy way, maybe that's a good start.
I'd say so. And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from all this. Technology, it's not good or bad in itself. It's how we use it.
He really makes you think differently about this digital world. It's not just convenience or fun, it's shaping us, how we relate to each other, how we think.
He doesn't want us to just be passive consuming technology. He wants us to be active, to shape the future of it. Be mindful, be critical, be intentional.
Lots to think about. Thanks for walking us through this. It's been a really interesting look at Han's work.
Happy to do it. These questions were always fascinating, and hopefully this has given you some new perspectives.
And for everyone listening, the digital world's always changing, right? So keep questioning, keep exploring, keep shaping the digital future you want to see. Until next time, happy diving.